Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Living Room to Lake. I am Travis Moran, and this is where we talk about this month's Lucky Tackle Box. And all of you guys sitting down in your living rooms, I'm in my office here. I'm going to break down these different baits, but I've already gone out and shot underwater footage and have a bunch of things to help you basically understand a little bit more about these baits, where to go use them, and hopefully give you some confidence in going out and having some success on your own. So we got a fun show here today. We're going to be announcing our final $100 winner of the Bass Money LTB challenge we had going on, where people were sending pictures of their current baits in their box, and we were giving out $100 prizes to the ones that we liked the most. So we are going to be crowning another winner of that at the end of the show, and we're also going to be having some more fun. We're going to basically be answering questions throughout the show as well. So if you guys are watching, feel free to ask any questions that you have. And Rachel is in the chat rooms monitoring those, and she will pass along any of those questions to me, and I will be more than happy to answer them. And then we've got Kate throwing up all the great graphics, providing a fantastic show. So without further ado, let's get into another episode of Living Room to Lake. This month's theme, which you guys have seen that we have now gone to themes for 2020. This one is post-spawn baits. These bass, they came up in their pre-spawn, they went up shallow, did their thing, and now eventually they're going to be moving back out. Some are going to stay shallow depending on how much cover and things there are up in the shorelines in those shallows, but some are going to move back out on that little migration that they followed in the pre-spawn, and they're going to sprinkle out all throughout there. So having a wide variety of lures that you can target those bass in different areas is key. And there's the card right there, post-spawn bass. Look for that little message in every box so you can understand the theme that these baits were put into when they go into the box. They're not just randomly selected lures. These have a place in the teaching platform that we've created. Now, next, another part of our education and entertainment side is the magazine, the Lucky Monthly. That's a personal friend of mine that puts that together, and he works with a couple other people coming up with the articles and things. But those are meant to be articles that can apply to a wide audience. A lot of our subscriber base fishes from the shore, especially during the current situations in the United States and the world. A lot of us are limited to the shoreline or kayaks or smaller pond boats, and we make sure that these articles are applied to, can be used and practiced through people that are having limitations, that aren't having $100,000 bass boat and all the electronics that go out there. And so they've done a great job creating articles that you guys can really put to use. So make sure you guys read through that to get a little inspiration, a little bit more to think about as well. So now let's get into the box. Let's get to the good part of this, or I guess the best part of the box. Maybe not the magazine, everything else is good, but let's talk about the baits here. The first one we've got in there is the Gambler Lures Flappy Daddy. This is just your standard cross style bait. You've got some nice little flappy pinchers right there. They come connected together. You want to make sure you pull those apart. That's just how they're stored. That's how they're poured and then how they store them. But you want to make sure you pull those little legs apart from each other. And that creates a lot of water displacement, a lot of action that draws those fish in. And then we combined that with the Mustad Flippin Kit. This has been a huge thing we've added to the subscriptions this year, is the terminal tackle that fits along to help you actually fish these baits that you're getting in your box. So Mustad put together this Flippin Kit right here that has the three key components to flipping the fresh vegetation that's going to be growing in the shallows this time of the year. You've got a 3/0 punch and hook. You've got a 5/8 ounce tungsten weight, and then you've got a bobber stop, which is going to peg that weight down to that hook so it's not free sliding. So the whole thing will slide through. So we can go back to that original Gambler slide real quick, Kate, so we can see how this all fits together. You'll see you just rig it up, Texas rigged. The bigger difference is that you have a bigger weight and you have a bigger hook. And you're going to be able to flip this in all kinds of vegetation and stuff. I know that there's times I use up to a 2 ounce tungsten weight. But this time of the year, early in the season, you're having fresh vegetation. You don't have that stuff just fully gunked over yet. It's still kind of easier to get through with these different punch weights and stuff. So I was actually punching lily pads at my local reservoir that I've had access to lately. And you've got these lily pads that are basically overlapping each other, and you need a little bit of weight to be able to shake down and slide that between there. But what you'll see from this underwater footage I've got is that there is these lily pads act like a canopy, and and as it falls through, it's actually clear beneath there, other than the little stems coming up. So you can have, like you see right there, you can have 5 feet underneath that canopy, or it can be shallow, it can only be a foot. But these bass feel very comfortable because they have the cover that they need. They come up underneath there, they feel protected, they feel hidden, so they're comfortable trying to ambush and feed at whatever comes through there. And you'll see the bait drop through there. And so what I like to do is I'll shake it down, but I want to be ready immediately as it gets through there, because the bass, they're looking up, and when they feel something vibrating at the surface, they'll be ready. And when it pops through, they will pounce on it. You've got to be ready to set that hook immediately. And then what I do is I let it sink to the bottom. I'll hop it 1 or 2 times, and then I'll go to the next target. The other thing is when I'm looking at a whole area of lily pads, I want to focus on what is different in those lily pads. Is there a part that comes out a little bit deeper, creates a little point in the lily pads, or are there some little openings? A lot of times when there's light coming through, the bass will hang right in the shady part, waiting for something to swim over or swim down through, and they will ambush it there. So when you look at the tule, kind of pad whole area, you want to go, okay, what looks different? What's different? What are little unique things in here? And you want to make sure you target those. And when you get bites, note, why did I get bit right there? Why was that fish there? And then try to find other places like that. But this isn't just for an obvious situation where there's lily pads and then open water. You guys, this happens in so many different ways. When the water's coming up in the spring, all the wood and sticks and stuff that are on the bank now are pushed back in the water and then collect. The wind blows them into corners of the lake. Now, when this happens, you'll get what we call gunk piles. So you'll have a little cove where there may be 10 feet out from the shore, there's just wood stacked up on the surface that you can't even cast a lure to. But if you have a weedless setup like this with the heavier weight, you can toss up in there, shake it down through, and there will be bass waiting up underneath there. That wood heats up, and it will the wood heats up, absorbs the sun, and heats up the water below it, which is what these bass are looking for this time of the year. Another thing is, if you have just straight vegetation that's growing up all the way off the bottom, thick grass, those bass will go right up in that grass. There's actually tiny little channels and stuff and that they use like roadways to swim through there that you may not see from the surface. It'll just look like just grass, just thick. You wouldn't think there's fish in there, but there are bass all up in there because there's so much, there's crawdads, bluegill, there's so much to feed on, and it's very oxygenated. That vegetation is putting off all kinds of oxygen for those fish. And so these are prime areas that these bass want to be in. And so having this little setup is a key tool this time of year that can help you fish water that other anglers are not, that other anglers have not, it's amazing. Every time I teach this, I'm reminded how many people do not punch, do not have heavy Texas rig setups to get in that gnarly stuff. And if there is water in an area, there's fish in an area. I don't care what kind of junk, what kind of vegetation, a bass is in there waiting to ambush, because that's where the critters are going to be hanging out. So that's where the bass is going to go. Now, one little advanced tip to this is I talked about letting it go through, because this wants to sink fast. So when you shake it through, it wants to go down to the bottom real quick. Now, you've got to take note of how deep the water is and then where those fish are actually hanging out. So when you see this footage right now, you're seeing those lily pads are up at the top right there. And look at the little bait fish and stuff up there. Look at all those aren't bait fish, those are little fry. Everything is like oriented right underneath that canopy. So those bass are looking up. They are oriented, they are feeding upwards. So when you have a punch rig and you punch it through and it goes to the bottom, sometimes you may not be fishing where the strike zone those bass are hunting in. So when you come through, you may want to just hold it right at the surface right there, or just shake it a couple inches underneath so it looks like a little bluegill or something feeding on those fry and looking up. And that's a vulnerable position for that bait fish to be in, and those bass will hit it. So the advanced tip is to really understand your depth zone that bait is in. 99% of people let that bait go all the way to the bottom, and they hop it and go to the next spot, where the true strike zone may be right at that surface, right when it goes through, keeping it right at that spot right there. Another way to tell when this is the bite is sometimes when you're trying to shake, if you cast up and you land on the lily pads, you're trying to shake it through, a bass will come up and hit it right there, boosh, and before it's even in the water. And that should clue you into, oh my gosh, these fish are feeding up. They are looking for that exact opportunity. So then you want to make sure you keep mimicking that as you go down the bank. So great bait, you guys. This is going to be a very good technique for you this time of the year. You need a little heavier rod. Use your flipping setup. Use a little bit stiffer rod to actually fish that, a little heavier line, because you're going to be pulling fish out of heavy cover and structure. And then Rachel, let me know if we've got any questions coming, because I will make sure to kind of answer some questions after each one of these lures I talk about here. Moving right along, guys. The Floppy Daddy is scented. There's a lot of debate and advantages for a scented bait. The first thing is that the fish will hold onto it longer. Okay, that fish comes up and eats it. They're using all their senses to hunt something. And when a fish bites something, they're not necessarily trying to eat it. I'm going to tell you guys something that may sound obvious, but I'm going to tie it into a bigger point. A bass does not have hands. Okay. Are you guys still with me on this point? Now that means if it wants to check something out, we look at something weird and we pick it up, and then we're like, oh, could this be food? And we smell it, and we may then taste it if it passes those tests. Well, fish doesn't have hands. So its test, if it's interested in something, is it eats it. It puts it in its mouth. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's planning on eating that whatever it is, and it may just spit it back out and go along its way. Now, if you have scent, it passes another test. It doesn't taste foreign to it. It tastes like what it thought it might taste like. So scents are very important. The other thing is having scents on your bait can mask the foreign scents that you may be unintentionally putting on there. We're lathering ourselves in sunscreen. We are using the gas, we're gassing up at the gas pumps and getting that smell on us. There's a lot of foreign smells that are very potent to a fish that's literally, has all these senses to register that. And when they taste something foreign, that could be going against you. Having scents that are designed to be what bass are looking for is going to be an advantage in your favor. Very good question, Brian. Rachel, we got another one, or are we moving along? All right, Rachel is scanning the questions. I'm going to keep moving along, and she'll just tell me if she got some more questions. Gotcha. Yes, we were having communication errors with Rachel through my phone that was on mute. So Rachel, you should be able to hear me now. Okay. So yeah, let me know if we got questions, Rachel. All right. Dreadnought 89 is going a little bit sideways on our conversation here. He wants to know best springtime baits for nighttime fishing. Nighttime fishing. So this goes into just the senses, about the sense we were talking about. A bass is going to use what it has available to it, right? So if you are at night, sight is not going to be as big of a factor for bass hunting. They're going to look at noise, water displacement, the vibrations in the water, scent, And that's going to help them key in. So you want baits that displace a lot of water. This flappy out of these big flappers right here, as you hop this bait along, it really displaces, it moves a lot of water, which bass, that's what they're honing into. Just having a big profile bait in general, those 10-inch worms and things, those are a lot of movement. Bass can key in on that. Then having something that top water that makes a lot of commotion, these little prop baits, things like that can draw fish in as well. Just know that the fish are not seeing things as well, so you're going to have to play on their other senses. That being said, black is one of the best colors to throw at night because the silhouette shows up better than anything else. Any kind of other colors kind of just get dulled, where that black is real bold. They can kind of see that a little bit better. Black colored baits tend to do better at nighttime. So good luck with that. And so next we are the Productos Mullet Shad, a little swim bait, guys. It's really important to have a little 3-4 inch soft-bodied swim bait like this. They can be rigged a lot of different ways. You can just throw a little jig head on here. You can throw a little football head, cast it out, and reel it in. But for this box, we actually paired it up with the Mustad underspin. Underspins have become extremely popular as of lately, and so Mustad has joined in and created their own underspin. Mustad's really stepped up and come out with a lot of new SKUs in their lineup this year. And so this is brand new for 2020, a great little hook to be using. You can throw a number of little swim baits. You can really experiment with it, but it's a very easy bait to use. You just cast out and reel in. And when you combine it up with a little swim bait, what happens is you're going to get two things going out of it. You're going to get the realistic look out of a small little swim bait like this. That tail is going to be moving, so it looks natural, but then you're getting the little flash of that little underspin right there, and that's going to be putting off the little flash and really drawing fish in. So you can see right there, all you do is you're going to figure out, what I do is I take the bait and the hook and I hold them up together right where I want it to end up being. So you can see I got it right next to it, okay? And then I figure out, okay, that's where the hook needs to come through. So I make a little mark right there. So that way, when I thread this on, I go all the way down and I come out right where I have that little mark in the bait. So that way I'll have a perfectly thread, because I want it to be nice and straight. I don't want it to be kinked and stuff. I want it to be, nice and dynamic or aerodynamic. So it goes through the water correctly and it swims naturally. And so then we've got some underwater footage that you'll be able to see the combination of what happens. And so this is a bait that the speed of your retrieve is going to dictate how deep it runs or how shallow it runs. If you reel it with the rod tip up and you reel it quickly, it's going to run shallower in the water column. It's going to look like a little bait fish scurrying along the top. If you slow down that retrieve and put the rod tip down, that bait will go along the bottom and you can just hop it and bump it along the bottom, just like you would a spinner bait or a little kind of jig. Then if you give it a little jerks with the rod tip, you'll make that little blade kind of have a different little flash to it. You'll make that tail kick a little bit differently. Perfect little bait, somewhat weedless because that hook's on top. So you can kind of bring it over the top of grass because it's not going to hook up as much. And a lot of times you can have a single hook. If you do hook a little vegetation, you'll feel it. If you've got a good rod, you'll feel that little vegetation and you can give it a little twitch and it'll pop free of that vegetation, which can also trigger strikes. But once again, guys, this is a technique that is very easy to use. It can be done from the shore, kayak, whatever it is. You just cast and retrieve a very realistic looking bait. So it's a reaction style technique, but it can be done in finesse situations where the bite's a little sluggish. This little underspin can be fished to trigger some strikes. Then an advanced technique that I don't have the pictures of right here, but the one who really taught me this is Brent Ehrler, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago. When I was down in Mexico with him, he showed me a technique he does with the underspin. And what he does, he'll cast it out, let it sink all the way to the bottom, and he'll take like 5 quick turns of the handle as fast as he can turn it. So have the rod pointed straight out at the bait, and he just reels it 5 times and then stops it and doesn't do anything. Just leaves it all the same. And that on tight line, that bait will fall back down and hit the bottom, and then you'll give it 5 more cranks and then stop until it hits the bottom. And what it's doing is that bait is scurrying off the bottom really fast. It's darting up, and then it's kind of flailing back down to the bottom. And what it mimics is a panicked bait fish. Whether it's a bait fish that's gone up real quick to eat something, but then now is all of a sudden exposed and trying to scurry back down to the bottom, or a dying bait fish that's just kind of having its last little energy to kick up, and then it's kind of falling back down. Whatever it is, the bass see an opportunity and they hit it when you stop reeling. So you reel real fast, and then you're watching for your line to get hit. And he's like, yeah, you can see your line will just go whap. And it's a fun technique. And he says that's how he actually fishes it a majority of the time. So it's definitely something to try out. And I know a lot of the top anglers do this, or I've learned since a lot of top anglers do it, but I hadn't heard of a lot of the majority of anglers doing it. So this is something you can get ahead of the curve by doing. So I'm going to open up my window here. Rach, if you got any questions, fire them away. Good, Andrew. Andrew just asked if it's best to fish just a regular retrieve or a yo-yo technique. And the advanced tip I just talked about, where you just do like 5 turns of the handle real quick and then you let it stop, that's kind of the yo-yo. That is a little bit of a yo-yo technique. And that is, Brent Ehrler sold me on it. He was like, Travis, this is how I fish it the majority of the time. For some reason, this just gets them fired up. And so most times, if you use it a lot, you're gonna do a lot of casting and retrieving. But anytime that you can get away with doing that reel off the bottom and let it fall back down, I would do it. Now, if you got a lot of vegetation, if you got a lot of stuff to hang up on the bottom, you can't let that bait get all the way to the bottom. So you're going to have to kind of, figure it out depending on the water that you're fishing. But just know the top guys are really doing that yo-yo or that quick reel approach a whole lot. Good question, Andrew. All right, let's move this party along. Guys, frogs are so important this time of the year. And I always want to make sure that people understand that when I first started fishing, I was told topwater is a summertime thing. And that is really not true. Topwater works year round. Actually, it works in the dead of winter under the right circumstances. Bass want to be shallow. There's a lot of reasons it's easier for them to hunt when they're up shallow. There is a lot of bass are always looking for a reason to be shallow. And so having a topwater hollow-bodied frog is a must, because it's weedless and you can throw it into so many different situations where other baits, you're not going to be able to fish effectively. They're going to get snagged up. There's gunk, there's just too many variables that a frog can get in there clean. You can walk it and just mimicking any kind of little bait fish on the surface, or an actual frog, or some little animal that's fallen in the water. And if a bass is shallow, he's honed in to little critters scurrying across. And this is a great imitation of that. And spring, basically, as the weather starts warming up, those fish are looking to move shallow. The more cover that you have up shallow, whether it's vegetation, whether it's the wood we're talking about, the more those fish are going to be drawn to be up there shallow. And that's where this frog is going to shine. You can walk it, you can pop it. The frog that came in with the XL and the tournament box was the popping frog. And then the tournament subscribers actually got the walking frog as well. The difference is I actually like the popping style frog for most situations. The popping frog I like because you can walk it. It's weedless. You can do everything. You can do almost everything you can do with a walking frog, but then you can also make commotion with that cupped nose. You can pop it and really bring fish out of cover. You can make a lot of noise with it, really. And that's why I like all the advantages you can have with that style of frog. But then with a walking frog, where it's got that pointed nose, that's going to come over thick vegetation a little bit better. That popping, that cupped nose of the popping frog will, act as a little bit of a rake and kind of grab a lot of that algae and other vegetation if it's real thick. If you have mild stuff, you can kind of shake it over that and keep your rod tip up and hop it over. But once you've got those thick traditional frog mats, that's where the walking frog can work a little bit better. So just a lot of advantages. And you guys, once again, the frog is a little bit intimidating to new anglers. You want to use some heavier line like braid. I usually go anywhere from about 50 to 80 pound braid. I know that a lot of bank anglers always get upset with me when I talk about using such heavy line. 30 pound braid will work fine as well. And you can see when you come up to situations where you've got shallow water vegetation like this, like you're looking at the lily pads here, this is a perfect time. Those fish feel comfortable being up shallow. You fire up that frog up there and you can catch fish up shallow and not be snagged. The other thing is, this time of the year, especially if the water's clear, I like to cast my bait all the way up to the shoreline. Even if the bass aren't right up there, they're going to be out on the first piece of little cover looking shallow. So they will, once they see that bait coming from the shallows, they'll dart up there and hit it. And you can see in this video right here, I was working along this little toolie line, and there was actually lily pads and then a little bit of space and then the toolies. And I think those bass were kind of hanging out under the lily pads looking towards the toolies. And as I just made my way, I was in about a foot of water. My boat was in a foot of water. I was casting in about 6 to 8 inches of water and just slowly working along here, making sure not to make too much commotion. If you make too much noise and stuff, you can kind of spook them a little bit. They'll be a little bit more timid, but just making the cast. There isn't any special magic. I don't want to make a little commotion. This fish hit it almost the second it hit the water. I think I gave it a couple little twitches and it paused for a second and the bass just clobbered it. You got to really experiment with the retrieve though. You can walk it side to side with just little jerks on kind of semi-slack line. You can give it pauses. Bass get territorial this time of the year. So if you make a little commotion, the bass will kind of come nose up to it. And if you keep going, it might not hit it. But if you leave it there for 5 seconds, the bass will get a little bit angry, come up and smash it. So guys, frogs, something, just go out there, experiment with it. You will realize this has to be a tool in your toolbox at all times. And that's a big thing with all these baits I'm talking about, is there's going to be, the more you learn to bass fish, you will realize there's no magic bait that's going to fit all situations. You need, just like you're going to fix a car, you can't just come in with like, hey, I got one screwdriver and that's how I always fix my car. You need to have a bunch of tools. So once you figure out what needs to be done, you have the right tools to try to get that done. And that's what bass fishing is all about too, is you go to the lake and you've got to assess what's going on. You've got to figure out, okay, I think the fish are up in this area. So let's fish some lures that I can actually fish that area effectively and see if that's right. See if there are bass there. And that's what all these lures, that's what having a wide range of lures can help you achieve when you're out in the water. Now, an advanced technique to throwing a frog is, if you look at the legs, they come the same length. I cut one a little bit less, a little bit shorter than the other one. This is about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch I've cut off here. And I always remember, less, you can always cut more. So you don't have to just cut big cuts, cut just a little bit at first. And the reason I do that is this helps this bait walk side to side better, because it's unbalanced. When I twitch it, it'll want to jump to one side. So then when I twitch it the other time, it'll jump to the other side. So it always forces this bait to walk a little bit more effectively. When it's evenly laid out as it comes in the box, that helps that frog kind of stay more balanced. It doesn't want to walk side to side as much. And you really do want to get that walking action out of those frogs. So little technique for you to give that frog a little bit of a haircut. And I know that that's our new hobby anyway, is haircuts, which I have not done yet. I'm going to be getting to the haircut, and maybe I'll cut my frog legs the same time. So Rachel, we'll hit Rachel on the questions here. Rachel, we got any comments, questions, anything going on? Okay. Corey asked, what color should you use in stained dark water? And I'm going to first answer that in the frog because we're talking about the frog, but this kind of goes for everything. Clear water, and just it's kind of common sense too, right, guys? And just think about it. There's no magic answer. It's just like what kind of makes sense. Clear water, the fish are going to be able to see things better. And so you want something that looks more natural, that has that green pumpkin, that just has more natural colors, because it's going to show up very well. Now, the more stain you put in that water or the lower light, then you've got to go to a little bit more bold colors. You don't want as much of a little transparent color that's a little bit more see-through. That's more of a natural look. You want something that's more of a solid painted bait. And sometimes you're going to use chartreuse, orange. Those colors show through a little bit more in that stained to dirty water. Then you can go with some blacks. You can go with some real bold colors. That's where I really like a black frog. Really, the only two colors I throw with frogs are black or white. Black I'm using on a little bit more, lower light situations, and the white I'm using a little bit more of a natural, clear water presentations. But I kind of got more of a natural look, and then more of the bold that's going to show up a little bit better. The white also for a frog and a lot of lures. If you look at the underbelly of pretty much every single critter, whether it's, even rats, frogs, fish, their underbelly is white or kind of more of that eggshell white. And so when you're in doubt, just use something that's that white, that bone white, that eggshell white, because bass want to strike from below. So that is the color they are attacking the most, is that white color. So that's always a good place to start as well. Good question. Any more, Rach? Okay, Andrew asked for the popping frog, whether it's best to throw a mono or a braid. Now, mono is neutrally buoyant, so it does work for topwater baits as well. However, and so where it's like fluorocarbon sinks, so that's going to pull the nose down. So when you are trying to work a topwater bait, it's going to pull the bait down. So mono can work, but braid is the most efficient because it floats. It naturally floats, and it has very limited to no stretch. So you can really control that bait really well. So if you just give it the tiniest little twitches, you can get it to do the action you want. And then lastly, you can get a good hook set. These hooks are weedless, so you do have to put quite a bit of a hook set into this to get these hooks to really pop out of there and dig into that fish. And then lastly, we're fishing around heavy structure and cover, or heavy cover. So when that bass comes out to hit that frog and then goes back down to the grass or back into those tree limbs, you've got to really horse that fish out. You got to put a lot of pressure on there. And the bigger that bass, the more pressure it's going to be going back and forth on a tree limb or whatnot. And that's going to potentially break your line. So I would always suggest using braided line, no less than 30-pound braid, but 50-pound would probably be the sweet spot of what you need to use. Another good question from Andrew. I get this question every single live that we do, is what my go-to bait is. And I have quite a few go-to baits. It kind of goes back to the analogy of you need a lot of tools to fix a car. And that's what fishing is. You need a toolbox full of tools that you can fish the different situations. But at the same time, a mechanic is going to have his favorite tools. When he doesn't know what's wrong with the car and he's trying to figure things out, he's pulling stuff apart to narrow it in. He's got his favorite. He will pull out the same tools every time to start his job. And that's where I have some lures that I use a whole lot more. And anyone who's watched a handful of my videos will know that the lipless crankbait is one of my favorite go-to tools because I can cover a lot of water. When I'm fishing an area, when I get to a new body of water, or if I haven't been to that body of water in a long time, I want to run around as fast as I can, check all my favorite spots, and really understand the lake. And it's not so much about catching fish, but I know the lipless I can catch. I feel comfortable being able to catch fish with that, but I can also see if there's a lot of grass down there. I can fish it in a lot of different situations as I'm trying to cover and check out that body of water. Bass fishing is all about adapting to the conditions. And so I know that a lot of us don't get to fish as much as we would like to, right? That's the story everybody has. No matter how much you are actually fishing, you don't get to spend as much time fishing as you'd want to. And so I would suggest as anglers, if you're like, man, I go once a month or I only go a few times a year, that you start doing a little bit more scouting ahead of time. As you're coming home from work or the weekend before, go by that lake that you're going to go fish and just check it out. Just see what vegetation there is, see how low the lake is, see if there's, what the shallow water cover is that's being offered. So then that next week, the next 7 days, you can kind of think about what lures you're going to tie up on, what lures you're going to throw. So you kind of have a little bit of a game plan. You're not just getting to the lake and being like, oh man, I don't have any baits that I need to fish this. Last year I caught them on a frog, but now the lake is really low. There's no cover underwater. Now it's just kind of barren bank. These fish are probably going to be a little bit deeper. And so you kind of want to do a little bit of scouting ahead of time. The other thing is you go a week ahead and you can kind of get an idea of what's going on. Ask some people that are pulling their boats out. Hey, what did you catch them on? What are the fish doing? And then the rest of the week, you can watch the weather as well and kind of understand what weather these fish are experiencing throughout that week and help you kind of make some educated guesses to where those fish are going to be when you head out on the water. So good question. All righty. Moving on to the Senshi. Guys, this is a prop bait, top water bait. The way that you fish this bait is you've got to fish it on some line that floats. So you can go the mono or the braid. This one, mono actually isn't such a bad idea because this one, look at all those hooks and everything. You're not throwing this thing into cover, right? You're not throwing this thing on top of vegetation. You're throwing it out in the open water around cover. And what you're doing is you cast it out and you give it little pulls. You just pull it 1 to 2 feet and then reel up the slack, pull it 1 to 2 feet, and it makes this little chopping noise because those two blades on either end are spinning and it's chopping the water. And as you pull it, it makes that little noise. And what that does is those bass hear something coming, and it kind of mimics like those little, whether it's bait fish at the surface or the sound of like little fry trying to scatter because something's chasing them. The bass really key into that. It really gets bass fired up. And so you really want to throw this around any kind of cover, especially tree limbs and things. If you've got a tree that's falling down into the water, you've got vertical trees that are in the water that are sticking up, you can throw this thing past it. And as you work this thing up to it, that picture right there is a great example. You've got gnarly stuff down there. As you work this bait over the top, you can pause it, work it, pause, work it, pause. And that bass will slowly start coming up and keying in on what's going on. And as that bait gets to the strike zone, it'll come up and smash it. So this is a really, really effective tool around flooded timber. I know that this is one of my favorite baits to throw at a lake called Lake Sonoma up in Northern California, where they didn't cut all the trees down. They left some trees in certain areas. And so there's trees that are in like 40 feet of water that are sticking straight up, and none of them have branches anymore. All the branches have been broken off. So it's just like almost like pilings that are 30 feet under, that go from 30 feet down to like 60 feet above the water. And there's just these like fields of them. And the bass will suspend around them. And there's times the bass will be 15, 20 feet down. And if you're throwing a little prop bait and you're slowly working it, those bass will slowly come up, and then hit that bait. So once again, a very effective tool to have. You can throw this in all kinds of different situations. I throw it at Lake Mead in the desert, where it's real ultra clear water. And there's little like grass patches up shallow. These bass will kind of come up in, and I'll throw it alongside those grass patches, and those bass will come out and smash it as well. Now, an advanced technique for this is I add a feather to it. You remember a couple boxes ago, Mustad included a feather hook. in the box, and they also included their Mustad split ring pliers. So you can go ahead and you can swap out that. I don't know if you guys can hear my little kid crying in the background. I think he's out in the backyard with my wife, and it sounds like he just tumbled down the hill. I don't really mean that. I think he's fine, guys. The back hook right there, you can swap it out with the feather hook, and that's going to just give it a little bit more of a natural look as you are pausing it. Remember we talked about as you're pulling, pause, pull, pause, give it a couple pulls, pause. That bass is coming up. It's sizing it up. It's going, what is that commotion? I'm interested. Am I going to eat it? And it's still trying to process whether it's going to strike. As it's coming up closer to it, that little tail, as it's paused, that little tail is got a lot of reflection in it. It's got little sparkles to it. So as that bass is moving, that tail looks like it's also moving. It looks like it's got a little life to it. So it makes that bait look more realistic when it's just sitting there. When I'm moving it, it's those props are spinning, kind of making some commotion. So that makes it look more real when it's moving, but when it's still is where that feather hook is really going to help you out. And that's why we included that a few months ago as part of the tools to help you really adapt these different baits to these situations. So guys, that is it for the baits in the box. Rachel, do we have some more questions? Joseph asked if these baits are good for using in the weeds. And so I touched up on that a little bit in the beginning, but so yes and no. Directly in the weeds, no. If you've got weeds that are growing up all the way to the surface, there's trouble hooks, right? So you're actually just going to snag up those trouble hooks. We've also got little props on this bait. So they're going to get all tangled up in the vegetation as well. So if you've got grass that's growing all the way up to the surface, you're going to want to use some kind of hollow bodied frog, like the popping frog or the walking frog, right? So you get up on that and crawl that thing along. But vegetation, and this time of the year, there's actually a lot of this type of vegetation that's fresh vegetation that hasn't grown all the way up to the surface yet. So maybe you got 2 feet of water and the grass has only grown a foot up. Those bass will be down in that grass, but they'll be looking up. And this prop bait can be thrown over the top of that to pull these bass up to striking. Also, if you have grass growing in along the shallows and it only grows out to 3 feet, and you just see this nice little line that where the grass grows out to 3 feet and then there's just open water, you can throw it right down that line and make that commotion and pull these bass out from the grass. So there's 2 ways to fish cover. You can throw frogs right up on it, really, or you can use the punch weight to throw up in that grass, or you can try to call those bass out of the cover with little prop baits or things that make enough commotion to get these fish out of there. So a great question that is, it also comes down to just once again, understanding your tools and how to fish them. Guys, great questions tonight, actually. All right, if Rachel, I'll have you look at some more. If you see any more, let me know. But right now, let's give away $100. We were running our hashtag Bass Money LTB, where you guys were encouraged to send in a picture of the bait and some fish caught on it, some kind of picture using the baits that you were getting in the box. And so this final we've given out now. This is going to be the 5th winner of a $100 prize. Or it's $100 cash. It's not even a prize worth $100. It's $100. And that is Captain Rye Guy. Captain Rye Guy, congratulations. You just got a $100 stimulus package from Lucky Tackle Box. We appreciate you sending in that picture, and we appreciate you being a subscriber. We appreciate all you guys being subscribers. And thank you for your support. We loved all the pictures you guys sent in. Make sure you're always hashtagging Lucky Tackle Box in any of your posts so we can follow along in your adventures. We always look at those here at the office and have a good time sharing those memories with you guys. Rachel, is that it for questions? Well, guys, that does it for our living room to lake. I hope that you guys are fired up. I hope that you guys are thinking about how you're going to go apply these baits to your local water. And when you go out there and catch fish, make sure you hashtag Lucky Tackle Box so we can see that you guys are having success. That's going to do it for me, Kate, and Rachel here. And remember, no one works harder to help you fish better. I will catch you out on the water.